नमस्ते दोस्तों। एसएससी ट्रिक वॉल्ट के इस शानदार एक्सप्लेनर में सबका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to be unpacking the incredibly delicate balance of power, rights, and responsibilities tucked inside the Indian Constitution. If you've ever found yourself wondering how a massive, bustling democracy figures out exactly what it owes its people, and hey, what the people owe it right back, you're in exactly the right place. Just imagine this. The state has these grand, super ambitious goals for the whole nation, but boom, they directly collide with your personal fundamental rights. How does a democracy balance that without totally falling apart? Well, it's a huge question, one that actually sparked decades of fierce legal battles. And understanding the answer is literally the key to seeing how the Constitution works in the real world. So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll kick things off with the state's future goals, then move into classifying the principles. After that, we'll dive into the Supreme Court battles, unpack the citizens' fundamental duties, and wrap it all up by memorizing the 11 duties. Let's jump in. Section 1, the state's future goals. We're going to start right in Part 4 of the Constitution, specifically covering Articles 36 to 51. Fun fact, these were heavily inspired by the Constitution of Ireland, which actually borrowed them from Spain. And that brings us to the absolute core concept here, the Directive Principles of State Policy, or DPSPs. Think of these as positive instructions aimed at creating a true welfare state. They basically direct the government to build a society rooted in social and economic justice. But here's the kicker. They are non-justiciable, meaning if the government totally fails to implement them, you can't just drag them into court to force their hand. Now, this highlights the huge difference between the rights you're probably already familiar with and the principles we're unpacking today. Fundamental rights are often seen as negative because they strictly restrict the state from messing with your freedom. DPSPs, on the other hand, are positive directives. They guide the state toward these big future developmental goals. One is your absolute shield today, totally enforceable in court, while the other is a blueprint for tomorrow. So why make them non-justiciable in the first place? Well, honestly, a newly independent India just didn't have the cash. Guaranteeing things like a living wage, free legal aid, and equal pay, it takes massive, massive capital. Political thinker K.T. Shah actually hit the nail on the head with this brilliant blank check metaphor. He said the state could only pay out these rates when convenient, or, when the nation's treasury actually permitted it. But hey, the drafters didn't think they were useless at all. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar strongly defended them, calling them a unique feature of the Constitution. For him, these weren't just empty promises. They were absolutely crucial targets for the country's long-term socioeconomic evolution. They basically ensured that no matter which government took power, there was a clear, undeniable moral roadmap they had to follow. Section 2, classifying the principles. Now, the Constitution itself doesn't neatly sort these articles into distinct groups. But to make sense of it all, political experts generally organize them into three major ideological buckets. First up, we've got the socialist policies, which are all about fighting inequality and making sure wealth isn't just hoarded by a few. Then we have the Gandhian principles. These champion rural village panchayats, agriculture, and cottage industries, a true reflection of Mahatma Gandhi's grassroots vision for India. And finally, the liberal intellectual principles. These push for modern administrative goals, like a uniform civil code, and keeping the judiciary completely separate from the executive branch. Now, I won't lie, some of these articles are incredibly dense, especially Article 39 under that socialist banner. But there's a great little trick to remember its goals. Just picture a lower division clerk, an LDC, going to a public health center, a PHC. It maps out perfectly. Livelihood, equitable distribution of resources, preventing the concentration of wealth, equal pay, protecting workers' health, and safeguarding children. LDC to PHC. It's super handy, right? So, how does all this theory actually turn into real-world governance? Well, these abstract directives literally build our reality. Take Article 40. That laid the foundation for local village governance. Article 45's push for early childhood care, that gave us the entire Anganwadi system. And Article 48A drove the creation of our modern environmental and wildlife protection laws. They might not be legally enforceable on their own, but they are absolutely the DNA of our most vital laws. All right, Section 3, the Supreme Court battles. Because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Let's say the state decides to redistribute wealth to fulfill a DSPS. But doing that means taking land from someone, which violates their fundamental right to property. What on earth happens then? Well, it kicked off a monumental legal tug-of-war. On one side, you have Parliament pushing social policies, and on the other, the judiciary protecting individual rights. In 1951, the Supreme Court said, nope, fundamental rights reign supreme. By 1967, they ruled rights couldn't be amended at all. Then Parliament fought back, claiming DSPs actually take priority. It was quite the showdown. Finally, in 1973, the legendary Case of Ananda Bharati case swooped in, establishing the basic structure doctrine to set firm boundaries on what Parliament could actually change. So how did this epic showdown actually end? In the 1980 Minerva Mills case, the Supreme Court finally resolved it, and honestly, they did it beautifully. They declared that neither side is absolutely supreme. Instead, the entire Constitution survives on a perfect harmony and balance between the two. Think of it like a chariot pulled by two wheels. If one wheel gets prioritized over the other, you're just going to spin in circles. Section 4, the citizens' fundamental duties. And this is a really fascinating pivot. Think about it. If the state has all these grand duties to its citizens through the DPSPs, it makes total sense that citizens owe some duties back to the state, right? Having rights without any responsibilities just creates a massive imbalance. Enter Part IVA of the Constitution. Inspired by the USSR's Constitution, these fundamental duties were actually added during the 1976 emergency via the 42nd Amendment. The Sorensen Committee recommended these moral obligations to make sure citizens were actively pulling their weight in upholding the nation's culture and integrity. And just like the DSPs, these are non-justiciable. You won't automatically go to jail for ignoring them. The Parliament can absolutely pass specific laws to enforce them, like, say, laws against disrespecting the national flag. Originally, the committee suggested 8 duties. The government decided on 10, and today we have exactly 11 fundamental duties. That final 11th duty was tacked on much later, in 2002, via the 86th Amendment. It completely shifted the focus toward early childhood education, making it a strict duty for guardians to make sure their kids actually get to go to school. Which brings us to Section 5, memorizing the 11 duties. Because knowing there are 11 of them is great, but how do you actually remember them all? Well, we've got a fantastic, totally foolproof alphabetical trick to lock all 11 straight into your memory, matching them up perfectly from letters A to K. Let's start. A is to abide by the Constitution, the national anthem, and the flag. Super simple. B is for the noble ideals of freedom fighters. Think Bhagat Singh and Bapu. C stands for the 3 core, centered concepts of India: sovereignty, unity, and integrity. And D is about as straightforward as it gets: defend the country and render national service when called upon. Moving along, E is for equality and brotherhood, which is a powerful reminder to renounce any practices derogatory to the dignity of women. F links to our magnificent forts. It's a really great visual cue to remind us to preserve our rich cultural heritage. And G stands for greenery, urging every single one of us to protect the natural environment, our forests, lakes, and wildlife. Almost there. H is for developing humanism and a scientific temper, basically asking good questions instead of just following blindly. I reminds us of Gandhi's warning that an eye for an eye just makes the whole world blind, meaning we have to safeguard public property and abandon violence. J is for athletes like Jadeja, pushing us to strive for all-around excellence in whatever we do. And finally, K, our newest addition, is the duty to educate kids between the ages of 6 and 14. And there you have it, the complete architecture. The state uses its directive principles to build a better tomorrow, while the courts stand ever vigilant to keep the balance between those big goals and your personal fundamental rights. But look, a constitution is really only as resilient as the citizens who breathe life into it every day. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly important question. In this grand, high-stakes balancing act, what role are you playing to fulfill your duties and uphold this incredible republic? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.